Now, while this is our debut show on Rumble, and we could not be more excited to share it with you, we have spent the last several weeks broadcasting test episodes on Local, Rumble's community-based platform I just mentioned. During those test episodes, a common theme emerged. We are immersed in one of the most radical changes in American political life in decades, if not longer. Namely, one of the most significant and powerful factions in the United States, the Democratic Party and the left liberals who support it. The faction that dominates Washington, Hollywood, media, academia, and increasingly the largest sectors of corporate power simply no longer believes in free speech, either as a societal value or even as a constitutional doctrine. So many of our most recent intense political controversies are driven by this central degradation. It is the most significant dynamic driving so many of our most vitriolic debates. That is certainly what explains, for instance, the deranged, intense rage among liberal media employees over Elon Musk's vow to restore just a modicum of greater political free expression to Twitter, and even more so, their unified indignation over the reporting done by the independent journalists Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss, in which, whatever else you think of them, they did what journalists are supposed to do. They brought transparency to one of the nation's most powerful corporations by shining light on the internal censorship regime that had governed Twitter until very recently. That Americans disagree with one another is nothing new. This country has always been composed of a politically polarized citizenry. Probably that is an inevitable byproduct of creating a democratic republic that guarantees core civil liberties. By giving millions of people, then tens of millions, then hundreds of millions, the freedom to express themselves, to organize, to petition their government for redress, you're basically ensuring intense pluralism rather than uniformity of thought. The more authoritarian a society is, the more conformity there will be. Conversely, the freer it is, the more conflict of ideas and beliefs one will encounter. That's normal and healthy, to be expected. Indeed, that is the aspirational design of the United States. I've always seen the Constitution as a psychological and sociological document as much as it is a political one. That's because its framing fundamentally relies upon the founders' post-Enlightenment understanding of human nature, of our natural tendency to see the world differently, to simultaneously seek hierarchies but forge independence from them, to desire different outcomes based on our different interests, to factionalize into like-minded tribes and groups, to divide and fracture based on what most influences us. In other words, they understood that the nature of human beings is that we are going to disagree, often fervently. A society can deal with those inevitable disagreements by crushing them through the power of an authoritarian ruler, the dynamic under which the founders found themselves, and then waged a revolutionary war to free themselves of. Or we can instead allow ourselves to argue about these differences, and then attempt to mediate them through free debate with one another, an agreed-to set of rules that govern democratic decision-making where majorities ultimately are free to enact their preferences, provided they stay within the confines of constitutional limits. The founders chose that second model, one of democracy safeguarded by liberty, which in turn meant conflict, argument, debate, division, and factional polarization. And that's what American history has largely been driven by. But despite this centuries-old cacophony of political disagreements, there are certain political values to which most Americans, almost by definition, have always subscribed. These are our foundational or definitional values, hallmarks not of left or right, conservative or liberal, or belonging to this party or that one, but of being American. The values which bestow that term, American, was something more than just a mere signifier of geography. Without question, one of those historically shared values, arguably the most cohesive one, is a belief in free speech. The once revolutionary and still inspiring notion that individuals have the right to form their own views and opinions and to express them without being forced by some centralized state or corporate authority to recite things they do not believe, to suppress what they actually think, or worst of all, to be punished for stating their beliefs. Like most Americans growing up in the 20th century, these values were inculcated in me from childhood. We were all taught that despite the imperfections of our country, one reason to see ourselves as fortunate to live in the US was that it provides a guarantee of core civic freedoms denied in most other nations. The right to practice one's religion freely and to be free of a state religion, to enjoy a free press, to have a government barred from seizing our liberty or property or life without due process, and most of all, the right to express our views no matter how at odds they are with the decrees of authority without being punished for doing so. In that first test episode I mentioned that we ran on Locals, I recounted the first time I ever really noticed and then wrote about the way in which a belief in free speech occupies a rare and unique position in American political life, as one of those very, very few values which all of us reflexively support, without regard to where we fall on a political spectrum or to which political party we maintain allegiance. I began writing about politics in late 2005. Very shortly thereafter, a British historian named David Irving, long notorious for Holocaust revisionism and then denialism, was convicted in a criminal court in Austria in 2006. His crime? He delivered 2 speeches 17 years earlier in which he denied the existence of Nazi gas chambers and other atrocities. He admitted he delivered those speeches, but insisted he no longer believed what he had said. No matter, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. 3 years in prison for giving 2 speeches. Now, this happened during the second term of the Bush-Cheney administration, just a few years after the 9/11 attack, with the Iraq War still raging, just months after Democrats alleged that George W. Bush purposely let New Orleans drown in Hurricane Katrina because, in the words of Kanye West, George Bush doesn't care about black people. To say that the U.S. was plagued by extreme political polarization at the time is an understatement. The left and the right hated each other. And that's what made it so conspicuous to me, that the reaction in the United States to David Irving's criminal conviction in Austria was so unified and harmonious, basically unanimous. Americans from the left to the right and everything in between didn't need to think about or debate this. Being an American meant that, as repugnant as Irving's speech might be, of course it's repressive and wrong for the state to determine truth and falsity and then imprison him for his ideas. That's because we don't trust the state or any centralized institution of authority to decide historical truth for us or to punish us because we reject its decrees. On that old free blog on Google's blogging platform that I used back then. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our Locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.